connection within the disconnected. When we talk about the term connection, what is it that ideally comes to our mind? It's more often than not an idea of a social media connection, a Wi-Fi connection, an internet connection, or a mobile data connection. But while those things are very true and understandable in today's time and generation, we forget the vital and the more important meaning of the term connection. And that is a physical or a human connection, a one-on-one connection. And that's what today's topic is going to be all about, which is connection within the disconnected. We as human beings have a steady graph of all our lives. Where that life path takes us is individual, depends from person to person, varies from person to person. But we all have a steady graph wherein we're born, it's the day we come into this world. We have a steady incline, which is the rising years of our life. There is a peak that is hit around somewhere around the middle part of our lives. And then there's a gradual decline, which leads to a culmination of our lives. So is the graph that is followed by so many of the social media apps that we see today, whether it is Instagram, Facebook, and so many numerous other apps that came into being over the last many, many years. As per AI prediction, as per prediction by researchers that concentrate all their time and energy and focus into the graphs and datas of social media and artificial intelligence, it was predicted that such apps would have a steady decline from the year 2023. For example, Instagram and Facebook would start to see a reduction in the number of users from the years 2023 to 24 and so on, which means the peak for those apps was already hit a couple of years ago. But then a phenomenon occurred that was beyond the fathomable capability of artificial intelligence or any human intelligence on mind. That was the COVID-19 phenomenon. When this happened, it hit us like a wave, and none of us could see the cause and effect that it would have on mankind, on social media, and on so many things that happened around us. The first thing that's related to today's topic that happened when COVID-19 struck was that this graph, which showed and predicted a decline for apps in the years 2023 and so on, got further prolonged and said that we have not actually even hit a peak yet in terms of when we're talking about the incline, the peak and the decline. This was supposed to start happening in the year 2023. But because of COVID, we hit a plateau phase and it's continued a steady incline further, which means we are nowhere close to the peak from which a gradual decline would start, simply because of the increase in usage of social media apps. While that was great news for creators like me, while that was great news for people who have their entire lives revolving around social media, it led to a much, much larger conversation of mental health. And I'm so glad that this conversation happened, and a lot of people are taking this much more seriously than it has ever been taken in the past. It makes me question the fact of why this entire conversation started in the first place. Because we as human beings tend to ignore things till they get to the point where they cannot be ignored any further. The entire conversation of mental health started when we saw an enormous increase in suicide rates, when we saw an enormous increase in Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, and the millennials like me, being prone to problems like anxiety, panic attacks, depression, and suicidal thoughts. When it got to the point of suicides becoming eventually a pandemic is when we started to have the conversation of mental health. While I'm glad this conversation happened, let's talk a little more about why it led us and how it led us to the point at where we are today. As youngsters, and I'm talking specifically right now about the millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, we have a tendency to overindulge and overstimulate ourselves to make sure that the dopamine in our body is satisfied. Dopamine is basically a chemical that works as a neurotransmitter in your brain to tell your body that you are happy, you are filled with joy, you are satisfied because your life is wholesome and you have achieved your goals for the day, for the month, for that particular phase of your life. The dopamine effect is a very curious study to me simply because our body cheats its ways into producing artificial dopamine. Why is it that we have so many problems of addiction all around the world, whether we're talking about substance abuse, whether we're talking about alcohol abuse, or any other external substance that people consume to make themselves dependent on that particular substance? It is simply for the dopamine chase that it gives them for that particular amount of time. And while those things will make you feel like it's so hard to see youngsters or anybody of any age going through this kind of, an addiction, we do not realize that the social media addiction, the addiction of being constantly scrolling reels through the day, is equally, if not more so, harmful than the external substance abuse addiction that we have facing the world today. Let me get a little deeper into this. What happens with your body when you want it to produce dopamine? Now, this is something that can be very easily cheated into being produced. So essentially, I'll give you my example. If I wake up in the morning and the first thing that I did is get on my phone and I start to scroll, because ideally that's what used to happen to me, because I am a content creator. My entire life revolves around social media. But I would get on my phone, I would scroll, probably just thinking that I would scroll for about 5 minutes, and then I would go on with my day. When that 5 turns into 15, into 30, into 45, into an hour, is I do not realize. And when I'm scrolling through those reels, there's an artificial overstimulation that happens, an artificial dopamine being produced, simply giving you a very specific example. I'm watching reels and I look at a person's reel where they have woken up in the morning and they've set up their entire room. These very aesthetically pleasing reels, where there's quick cuts and very like addictive to look at, and so aesthetically cleaning their bed, and they've set up their rooms, lit a bunch of candles, and they're starting their day going for a run. Now, what happens to our brains is that we have consumed content that we want to be doing in our lives. So, artificially, our brain is satisfied looking at that content and thinking that another person's achievements are our own. So, our dopamine need for the day, or the dopamine requirement for the day, is satisfied. And we're done. That's it. Our body does not need to produce any further natural dopamine through the day. So essentially, what is happening is that you've scrolled past so many people's reels in the first few minutes or the first few hours of your day that you don't realize that now what you're going to do for the rest of the day. And that's what happens when you do not have the need, your body does not feel the need to produce natural dopamine or natural feeling of joy and satisfaction. You start to plummet into like a vicious cycle of overthinking, anxiety, depression, simply because you have a lack of motivation, because your artificial dopamine is already fed and you don't need to chase it any further. Which is why it is so important nowadays that people are talking about this, and I'm very glad that this conversation is happening, is that when we talk about seeking therapy, when we talk about getting to the root of mental health problems, because I am somebody who has faced anxiety for like the longest time in my life. It was at a peak for about 3 years ago where I just could not, literally, I had no control over my life. And when I spoke to a therapist, the first thing that she told me was, anxiety comes from a place of not feeling like you do not have control over your life, right? This is the one thing that changed my life altogether. Simply because when I chose to do one particular habit is when I woke up in the morning. I know it sounds extremely cliched. Wake up in the morning, don't look at your phone, life is so beautiful. No, that's not what I mean. You wake up in the morning, I actually avoid looking at my phone for at least 15 minutes, and that is my specific. Anybody could stick to their own. You could do 5, 10, 15, whatever works for you. I avoid looking at my phone for the first 15 minutes. In those 15 minutes, because I'm not scrolling through my phone, I'm forced to look at my surroundings. I'm forced to look at the things happening around me. And when I look at the bed, I'm like, oh, I want to make my surroundings clean. So it instinctively and automatically makes me want to get up. I clean my surroundings and I feel like, okay, wow, I did what I had to do. I did, not get indulged into social media for the first 15 minutes. I made sure that my surroundings are clean, and just making my bed is a small way and a small action for me to regain control of my life. And that is what subconsciously satisfies you, that you have the ability and the power to control every single action that you do through the day and through the months and eventually through the years, which is what helped me with my anxiety. So when we have the conversation of anxiety attacks, panic attacks, people going through depression phases and episodes lasting years and years, as heartbreaking as it is, we ourselves are responsible for trying our best at least to make sure that we regain control of our lives. And the only way that's going to happen is when we make conscious steps and conscious decisions to finding your own high through the day. Now, by finding your own high, what I mean is, like I said, dopamine high, everybody has it. A natural dopamine would essentially be like why, so I'm going to get into this a little later, but I'm just bringing it a little bit for reference. When there's an older generation, when there are people that are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, why have they not succumbed so hard to the social media addiction? Why did COVID not affect them in terms of social media as much as it did us? Because they're people who are already set in their ways because of the habits that they've created when they were young, right? So it is up to us to create those habits to make it happen for ourselves every single day. So when I talk about a natural dopamine high and finding your own high, what I mean is, first you regain control of your day by doing one small act for yourself. It could be making your room clean. It could be probably just like getting a shower because you've been in a depressive episode for so long that you haven't had the motivation to get up from where you are. It could just be as simple as making a meal for yourself. And this happens to me. Like midweek, I would just want to cook something really nice for myself. And once I do that and I make a really nice meal for myself, subconsciously I realize that I am worthy of being loved. A lot of self love pours in. And that makes me realize how important I am as a human being. It is so important to realize that you matter. It is so important to realize that you are not something that can just be overlooked in the larger scheme of things. Everything, I understand that the world outside is so overwhelming and it can get so exhausting to deal with sometimes. But it's very important to remember that you matter. And the only person that can give you that self-love is you yourself. So when we're talking about dopamine high, smallest of things, for example, making a meal for yourself, going out for a small workout, just going for a walk, petting a dog, leading to much larger achievements in life because small acts make up your daily successes and eventually lifetime successes. So when you do these small acts, you gain more and more control of your life, and eventually it leads to larger successes. For example, you're a lawyer, you end up winning a case against the opposing party. If you're somebody who's a doctor who's performed a successful surgery, all of these habits do not happen overnight. They only happen when you practice them on the daily. When you practice these habits on the daily to make sure that, am I doing the right thing by getting my dopamine fix artificially, which is forcing me and making me plummet into a pit of anxiety and depression and thereby causing my panic attacks? Or am I somebody who's going to chase a natural dopamine high and make it happen for myself? So these are the small habits that I suggest that a lot of people undertake and try to probably inculcate in their lives as well, because this truly will change the way you look at your life altogether. It is very easy to get caught up in the scheme of social media and look at what's happening, in the outside world. We also have this artificial fear of missing out, right? So by this, what I mean is, if I'm scrolling through reels and I look at a person who's living a life, who's at Lake Como in their house, in their parents' ancestral home, and they're having a great time with their friends, they're on a yacht, they're drinking, they're having a great time. That's not even my idea of a great lifestyle. But just because I see someone else doing it, my mind starts to subconsciously feel like you are missing out onto something. It's something that you should maybe perhaps want to be eventually doing in your life, when essentially that is not even one of the goals that I have in my life. So that is where you start to again lose control of your own thoughts. Is it something you're truly missing out on, or is it something that you're just afraid of missing out on? So that is something also we consciously need to look at. When we have the conversation of mental health, like I said, I'll get back to the elder generation, which is people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. I said that they have not been affected as much as the youngsters in COVID by social media and the entire addiction around social media, because they're so set in their ways. While that's a great thing for them, it's one of the biggest disadvantages as youngsters to see that happening, simply because when we have conversations about mental health, when we have conversations about youngsters going through suicidal thoughts and episodes, it's an uncomfortable space to talk about because we have people in the elder generation so set in their ways. We need more open-mindedness. We need, I'm talking as an elder part of the society, we need to be the ones to create that safe space for our youngsters, to make sure that they're comfortable enough to talk to us, to make sure that whatever they're saying is heard and there are no mistakes or judgment when they're talking about their feelings. It is so important to make sure that you create a space where people can come and openly talk to you about their problems. As an elder part of society, we really have something to work on, because if we're constantly judging and if we are constantly questioning the decisions made by the so-called kids of our society, it's going to lead us nowhere but an increased rates of suicide and depression. The best thing that we could do is create an open hearing, create a safe space, create a space where they can come and talk to you with a very open mind and heart. And that is only going to happen if you try to probably mold your ways differently. If we stop thinking that a person who needs therapy is somebody who has a neurological disorder, but that's not true, because now anxiety, depression, and panic attacks are also clarified as neurological disorders. So, I mean, everybody needs therapy. And why we do therapy is not to avoid neurological disorders. We do therapy to not get there in the first place. So I feel like there is no such thing as a small anxiety attack, small panic attack, small depression episode. It's all one large mix. And we as elders need to create that safe space so that our youngsters feel comfortable enough to come up to us and talk to us. And just getting back quickly before I culminate to the part of regaining control of your day, regaining control of your life, the most important thing that you can do for yourself is the two things that I said. Do one act of kindness for yourself every single day. It could be as small or as large as you can possibly perform, but it has to be an act that you're doing off of your phone and doing it in real life. And second, and I'll leave you with this thought, it's something, it's a quote that I wrote down years ago, and I always end all of my talks with it. It's a quote that reminds you that while you're worried about yourself, there's a huge, huge, huge universe and powers beyond your imagination that are working together to make your life beautiful and more amazing than you ever imagined. At the same time, it reminds you to stay grounded, because while there's a huge universe, you're also a small, tiny speck of dust in a huge, huge galaxy. So we have to continue to stay grounded. And the quote goes like this. It is, I am fire, I am ice, I am the storm that hits you twice. I'm going to repeat it for you all, and I hope you all say this to yourselves every single day. It goes as, I am fire, I am ice, I am the storm that hits you twice. Thank you so much. It was lovely talking to all of you. Thank you.